Do you ever feel like someone is wearing a mask, pretending to be confident and genuine, but deep down, something feels off? In a world where appearances matter more than character, it's easy to mistake arrogance for confidence and deception for authenticity. Stoicism teaches us that true wisdom comes from understanding human nature, not just at face value, but in its deepest layers. If you want to navigate life without falling into the traps of fake and arrogant people, this video is for you. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to help our journey. And make sure to watch till the end, because identifying these people could save you from manipulation, betrayal, and wasted time. Number 1. Arrogance disguised as confidence. A confident person doesn't need to prove their worth to anyone. They move through life with quiet assurance, knowing that real power doesn't come from boasting, but from action. On the other hand, an arrogant person seeks validation at every turn. They talk over people, dismiss opinions, and often make conversations about themselves. They confuse dominance with leadership and belittle others to feel superior. Take the example of a workplace environment. A truly confident leader listens, acknowledges others' ideas, and takes responsibility for mistakes. Meanwhile, an arrogant boss disregards feedback, blames others for failures, and only takes credit when things go well. They want to be seen as strong, but their insecurity always finds a way to show itself. Stoicism reminds us that external validation is meaningless. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinions than our own." A wise person doesn't need the world approval. They trust in their actions and principles. The moment you notice someone desperately seeking admiration, recognize it as arrogance, not confidence. So, how do you deal with these people? Simple. Don't engage in their ego battles. The moment they realize you're not feeding their need for validation, they'll either back off or reveal their true insecurities. Number 2, fake niceness versus true kindness. Fake people will shower you with compliments, act overly friendly, and make you feel special until they no longer need you. They operate on a transactional level, where kindness is just a tool to manipulate others into liking them. True kindness, on the other hand, expects nothing in return. It's quiet, consistent, and doesn't change based on circumstances. Think about a coworker who always flatters the boss, but ignores or mistreats subordinates. That's not real kindness, that's strategic behavior. Meanwhile, a genuinely kind person treats everyone with the same level of respect, whether it's the CEO or the janitor. Their character doesn't shift based on who's watching. Stoicism teaches us to judge actions, not words. Epictetus warned against trusting people too quickly, reminding us that if someone tries to impress you, know that they are acting, not revealing their true nature. If someone's kindness seems too good to be true, observe how they treat those who can't offer them anything in return. That's where their true character is revealed. To protect yourself from fake kindness, practice detachment. Don't get swept away by grand gestures or flattery. Pay attention to consistency. True kindness doesn't fade when there's nothing to gain. Number 3, they hate being corrected. One of the clearest signs of an arrogant person is their inability to handle criticism. They see every disagreement as a personal attack and react with hostility or defensiveness. A wise person, on the other hand, welcomes feedback because they see it as an opportunity to improve. Picture a debate between two people. One remains calm, considers different perspectives, and even admits when they're wrong. The other interrupts, raises their voice, and refuses to acknowledge any mistake. Which one is truly strong? The one who values truth over ego. Seneca once said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Growth requires humility, and arrogance is the enemy of growth. Fake people struggle with this because their self-worth is built on appearing perfect, not becoming better. So, how do you spot this trait early? Pay attention to how someone reacts to minor corrections. If they become aggressive, dismissive, or try to shift blame, you're dealing with someone who prioritizes image over substance. Avoid getting into pointless arguments with them. Wisdom isn't about proving you're right, but knowing when to walk away. Number 4, they talk more than they listen. A person's ego is often measured by how much they listen. Fake and arrogant people dominate conversations, not because they have something valuable to say, but because they love hearing themselves talk. They cut others off, dismiss opinions, and always bring the discussion back to themselves. Imagine sitting at a dinner table with someone who constantly brags about their achievements, interrupts others, and ignores meaningful discussions. This is a classic sign of someone who values being heard more than understanding others. On the other hand, a truly wise person speaks less and listens more because they know there's always something to learn. The Stoics believed that mastering silence was a sign of strength. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, practiced listening more than speaking, teaching that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we speak. If someone never asks questions, disregards others' experiences, and only talks about themselves, their interest in you is superficial at best. To deal with such people, don't compete for attention. Let them talk while you observe. The more you listen, the more you'll see through their facade. Eventually, their self-obsession will expose itself. Number 5, they pretend to know everything. A fake and arrogant person will never admit ignorance. They act like they have all the answers, even when they're clearly wrong. True intelligence, however, is the ability to say, "I don't know." The wisest people in history understood that the more they learned, the more they realized how little they actually knew. Consider someone who always gives unsolicited advice, speaks with absolute certainty, and refuses to entertain the idea that they might be mistaken. They fear being seen as uninformed, so they'd rather lie or pretend to be experts than admit they're wrong. Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers, built his entire legacy on the idea that the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. If someone claims to have all the answers, they're not wise, they're insecure. The best way to deal with such people is to challenge them with questions. Instead of arguing, ask, "Where did you learn that?" Or, "Can you explain that in detail?" Their confidence will crumble when they can't back up their claims. Number 6, they seek status over character. One of the biggest red flags of a fake and arrogant person is their obsession with status. They judge people not by their values, integrity, or actions, but by wealth, power, and social standing. If someone can't offer them something valuable, they dismiss them as unimportant. Consider the way they treat service workers, receptionists, or people they consider beneath them. They might act polite to someone rich or powerful, but turn cold and dismissive toward those they think don't matter. A person of true character, however, treats everyone with the same respect, regardless of their position. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful emperors in history, understood this well. Despite his immense power, he reminded himself daily that wealth and status meant nothing in the face of virtue. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. If someone only respects those above them, but mistreats those below, they're not a good person. They're a fake one." To protect yourself from these people, pay attention to how they treat those who can't offer them anything. If their kindness is selective, it's not real. Number 7, they overpromise and underdeliver. Fake people love to make big promises, but they rarely follow through. They exaggerate their abilities, claim they can do things they can't, and always talk about grand future plans that never seem to materialize. Their words are impressive, but their actions don't match. Think about that one friend who constantly talks about how they're going to change their life, start a business, or achieve something amazing. Yet year after year, nothing happens. Meanwhile, genuinely successful people quietly work toward their goals and let their results speak for themselves. Stoicism emphasizes action over words. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." If someone constantly talks about what they will do, but never follows through, they're showing you who they really are. The best way to deal with these people? Believe patterns, not promises. If someone repeatedly fails to deliver on their word, stop expecting them to change. Watch what they do, not what they say. Number 8, they play the victim when things go wrong. Fake and arrogant people have one thing in common. They never take responsibility. When things go wrong, it's never their fault. They'll blame circumstances, other people, or even twist the story to make themselves the victim. Taking accountability requires humility, and that's something they lack. Imagine working with someone who always has an excuse. When they miss deadlines, they blame the system. When they hurt someone, they claim they were misunderstood. But when things go well, they're quick to take credit. This is a classic sign of someone who cares more about their image than the truth. The Stoics believed in radical accountability. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Arrogant people create imaginary problems to deflect from their own failures. Instead of acknowledging their mistakes, they manipulate others into feeling sorry for them. So how do you handle them? Hold them accountable. Don't let them twist reality. If someone constantly shifts blame, question them directly. Their reaction will tell you everything you need to know. Number 9, they are obsessed with impressing others. Genuine confidence is quiet, but arrogance is loud. Fake people desperately crave admiration, so they spend their energy trying to impress others rather than actually improving themselves. They wear expensive brands, exaggerate their accomplishments, and constantly seek attention. Picture someone who buys things just to show them off, whether it's a luxury car, designer clothes, or expensive gadgets. They don't truly appreciate these things. They just want people to see them as successful. But true success isn't about material possessions. It's about substance. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, taught that man conquers the world by conquering himself. A person who needs external validation is not in control of their own mind. Real strength comes from inner stability, not flashy displays of wealth or status. If you notice someone is more focused on looking important than actually being important, be cautious. Their value system is built on illusion, not reality. Number 10, they surround themselves with yes men. A fake and arrogant person cannot tolerate being challenged. They only keep people around who agree with them, stroke their ego, and never question their decisions. This isn't because they're strong, it's because they're weak. They fear opposition because deep down, they're insecure. Think of a powerful leader who surrounds themselves with people who always agree. They may seem confident, but in reality, they are afraid of hearing the truth. Meanwhile, a truly wise person invites criticism, listens to different perspectives, and embraces challenges. Marcus Aurelius sought out people who would challenge him, not flatter him. He wrote, "If anyone can prove and show to me that I think or act in error, I will gladly change it. For I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed." Fake people don't seek truth, they seek comfort. To test someone's authenticity, disagree with them on something small. If they react with hostility or defensiveness, it's a sign they value their ego more than the truth. Avoid people who cannot handle different opinions. They will never grow, and neither will you. Fake and arrogant people reveal themselves in patterns. They prioritize status over character, talk big, but never act. Play the victim when things go wrong, seek admiration instead of wisdom, and surround themselves with people who never challenge them. Recognizing these traits will help you avoid manipulation, wasted energy, and toxic relationships. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps our journey and ensures more people learn how to navigate the world with wisdom. Until next time, stay sharp, stay stoic, and always choose authenticity over appearances.